Well, welcome to the first hearing of the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. Today, the Commission meets to ponder an important question. How can we, as a country, inspire universal service across America? In 2016, the Commission was created amid a debate over whether the Selective Service Registration requirement should be extended to include women after military combat roles were open to women in 2015. The late Senator John McCain and Senator Jack Reed, seeing an opportunity to promote the notion of service above self, championed the expansion of the Commission's mandate to include an evaluation of service in America across all service lines, not just the military. They tasked us with fostering a greater attitude and ethos of service among Americans, particularly youth. We know that young Americans have an interest in service given their appetite to volunteer. Over 28% of millennials report volunteering in 2017, performing roughly 1.5 billion hours of community service. How do we inspire a greater percentage of Americans to serve? One of the first steps that the Commission took shortly after our creation was to define service. For the purposes of our work, service is a personal commitment of time, energy, and talent to a mission that contributes to the public good by protecting the nation and its citizens, strengthening communities, or promoting the general welfare. As you know, there are various definitions of service, and there are numerous programs beyond federally managed programs that support universal participation in service, such as faith-based, community-led, privately managed, or state-driven models. Today, we are here to explore in greater depth how to increase awareness and inspire the next generation to serve through a diversity of options and pathways. As we traveled around the country and discussed this with experts and everyday Americans, it became clear that many Americans are willing to consider a transformative effort to involve more in service. The Commission has heard a variety of universal service options to encourage or require service of all citizens. These conversations have focused on three approaches: universal access, making sure that everyone with a desire to serve can do so; universal expectation, while service stays voluntary, it becomes the norm; and universal obligation. All Americans are required to serve, but have a choice of how they serve. Our distinguished panelists will address all three approaches of universal service and share the diversity of options currently available for Americans to serve. I hope they will address this as directly as possible in their oral statements and in their responses to Commissioner questions. So let me welcome our panelists. Tom Chaboya is the president of Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Dr. Robert Grimm, Jr. is the director of the Do Good Institute at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Mr. Jeff West is the corporate responsibility leader for IBM. And Teresa Walsh is the national vice president of training and quality improvement at the Boys and Girls Club of America. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, let me explain how we will conduct today's hearing. The commissioners have all received your written testimony, and it will be entered into the official record. We ask that you summarize the highlights of your testimony in the allotted 5 minutes. Before you, you will see our timing system. When the light turns yellow, you have approximately 1 minute remaining, and when it turns red, your time has expired. After all testimony is completed, we will move into questions from the commissioners. Each commissioner will be given 5 minutes to ask a question and receive a response. I remind commissioners that while I am loath to gavel down a panelist, I am less reluctant to gavel down a commissioner. Depending on time, we will proceed with 1 and possibly 2 rounds of questions. Upon completion of commissioner questions, we will provide an opportunity for members of the public who are in attendance to offer comments either on the specific topic addressed today or more generally on the Commission's overarching mandate. These comments will be limited to 2 minutes. The light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining and red when your time has expired. We are now ready to begin our panelists' testimony. I'd like to begin with Tom Chaboya, president of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Mr. Chaboya, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Chairman Heck and Vice Chairperson Wada for the invitation to be here today, and to all the other commissioners for this opportunity. The Jesuit Volunteer Corps was founded on the belief that cultivating a culture of service among young people is a valuable contribution to the common good. In addition, it provides a unique opportunity to broaden their understanding of the challenges that many face in our society. We do this by engaging young adults in service to others. living with, learning from, serving our neighbors in need. For over 40 years, JVC has been a pioneer in the service landscape, providing opportunities for youth to contribute to the betterment of society. Our former Jesuit volunteer network is more than 10,000 strong across the world. While JVC comes to us, volunteers come to us from a variety of backgrounds, they all share a passion for engaging in the most difficult challenges with integrity, faith, and resolve. They care deeply about social justice. They want to discern where and how they're called to live out their lives, and they're open to having their hearts and minds changed by the work they do and the people they serve. These are young people trying to understand how to integrate these values into their daily lives. They are leaders hungry to change the world, but uncertain of the best course to do so. They have humility, recognizing they must learn and accompany before they can act and help. Jesuit volunteers commit to their current term of service after an application process that pushes them to articulate their motivations and goals for pursuing service. When they come to orientation, they're ready to immerse themselves in the values of spirituality, simple living, social justice, and community over their year of service. The formation program that supports them throughout the year frames the key components of the volunteer service. Jesuit volunteers serve full-time with social service agencies and schools, working with community members who are facing critical social and economic challenges. Our volunteers add capacity to nonprofits by serving in direct service roles as case managers, advocates, and teachers. They do community outreach and tend to the physical and emotional needs of the people they serve. Through their service, they learn firsthand about the social and structural obstacles that impede the well-being of individuals and families. Their service provides insights into the ways that they could work to alleviate poverty and gain a deeper understanding of its root causes. Living in community with other volunteers is a source of support through a challenging year, provides ongoing community and opportunity to reflect on their experience with others, and builds a foundation for lifelong friendships who share their commitment and values. Every day, our partner nonprofits are on the front lines addressing the social and economic issues in the community they serve, and having access to full-time volunteers who provide a continuum of services adds capacity and capability to their missions. All our volunteers in the placements are required to do at least 70% of their work in direct service, so working directly with individuals to provide access to critical services and support. JVC's role is to challenge young people at a time in their lives when they're making important choices about their future, pursuing an advanced degree, choosing a career, starting a family, and to provide what former volunteers consistently refer to as a life-changing experience. In this way, service to others becomes a way of life, regardless of whether they choose to remain in the nonprofit world or pursue other vocations in the public or private sector. Former volunteers are in every sector of society. They serve the public interest as members of Congress. They found and lead organizations at the forefront of social change, and they hold senior positions in the financial sector. Let me just address real briefly the question of how federal government support could help make volunteer service more viable. Like many nonprofits, JVC relies on a combination of earned and contributed revenues to sustain its mission. And our partners pay modest fees to help cover the direct costs. But as all of you know, the challenges that young people face in making the decision coming right out of college is challenging when they're often loaded with student loan debt, pressures from their families to move into full-time jobs, and other pressures. We are looking for opportunities to incentivize this by not only providing scholarships for particularly lower income volunteers to help them use to pay down their student loan debt. We are beginning dialogues with AmeriCorps to look at other ways in which we can take advantage of the benefits of AmeriCorps to help the volunteers see a path going forward. And we continue to work with our former volunteers to identify mentoring and other resources that they can do to help provide entry-level positions to Jesuit volunteers coming out of their years of service. Thank you very much.
Dr. Grimm, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Heck, and distinguished members of the National Commission. I'm thankful to speak to you today as our country faces an urgent need to turn around historic declines in service. I appreciate the invitation to share the University of Maryland's Do Good Campus model, which is countering negative national trends by equipping a new generation of young people to transform our world. In the years since 9/11, American volunteering has steadily declined to an all-time low. Dr. Nathan Dietz and I were surprised to find that 31 states have experienced a significant decline in volunteering, and not one state has experienced an increase in volunteering. College and high school volunteering is lower and stagnant today. Fortunately, there is good news about the road ahead. There is a 51-year high in entering college students' belief that it is important or essential to help others in difficulty. There is an all-time high in college students' desire to become community leaders. The desire to serve is there, even if the action is not. Our Do Good Campus model is translating youth's historically high interest in service into impact and reversing the troubling trends detailed in my testimony. The idea of our Do Good Institute gained considerable momentum when we worked with a group of early students who noticed piles of good food being thrown away every night at dining halls. After winning our first Do Good Challenge, we worked closely with those students, which developed into an award-winning nonprofit called the Food Recovery Network, which today has chapters on 230 college campuses, and its volunteers have recovered millions of pounds of food. Their impact is notable, but not unique. Last year, we had an alum who was named a finalist for the Pritzker Emerging Environmental Genius Award for creating the first stormwater credit market in the world. The Do Good Campus's key strategies could be adapted and replicated at other universities and high schools. In particular, deploying high-quality, hands-on learning that taps students' passions and empowers them to make an impact today. Launching a wide-reaching prize competition, we expanded dramatically through an exciting campus-wide Do Good Challenge and creating a pipeline of service experiences that build upon one another. Let me take a hypothetical Do Good Campus student. We offer that student some general education courses for learning and practicing how to address social issues in innovative ways. Our Do Good Challenge aligns with other course offerings so that participation is part of the student's academic experience rather than one more extracurricular activity to juggle. As the student builds knowledge and experience, we offer the option to enroll in academic programs focused on innovation and leadership, the opportunity for seed funds and coaching to advance their effort. This student can now get paid to work all summer on their project or venture at our Do Good Accelerator, and after graduation, we'll continue to support their efforts. Our approach, detailed in my testimony, has earned the support of university and state leaders, engaged students from all our schools and colleges, and can be replicated if we reimagine service and civic education. Let me highlight a few of the policy ideas that could inspire a movement toward universal voluntary service. First, engage all students explore engaging all students in federal, state, or local high-quality, required, multiple-year civic or service requirements in secondary schools aligned with the core mission, developing student leadership and innovation skills, and incorporating real-world experiences. Consider exploring developing a national Do Good style challenge incorporated in colleges and high schools. Make the federal government a catalyst for more nonprofit startups and nonprofit and public leadership development. Together, we can spark innovations, impacts, and economic development to solve today's and tomorrow's challenges. To paint a picture of the future, our Do Good alumni are creating thousands of new American jobs by selling what is termed ugly produce. They're recovering and recycling viable medications that are going to over 17,000 individuals. They're helping free multiple journalists unjustly imprisoned abroad. When youth are empowered to serve in ways that tap their desire to innovate and lead, and we build on those experiences with ladders to an array of public service careers, we will see a generational shift in service to our country, and that transformation cannot come soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grimm. Mr. West, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Heck, members of the Commission, my name is Jeff West, and I serve as Corporate Responsibility Leader in IBM's Corporate Citizenship Unit. I appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning, and will provide a brief overview of how IBM is making an impact in communities around the world, specifically through service. For over a century, IBM has valued the importance of service in the communities where we live and where we work. Today, IBM has a range of initiatives based on the premise that the best way to help communities is by sharing our technologies and professional skills with partner organizations that are addressing social challenges. This is not a new idea, but it gained momentum in 2003 with the launch of IBM's global initiative to support our employees' volunteering efforts. Since then, IBMers in 80 countries have recorded over 21 million service hours. The program encourages active and retired employees to apply their professional skills to community needs and provides resources to help plan effective volunteer engagements. In 2008, we built on that success by launching Corporate Service Corps, an initiative inspired by the Peace Corps. Corporate Service Corps sends teams of IBM's leading experts to work with governmental and social organizations, healthcare providers, and other civic leaders to help address high-priority issues in education, health, economic development, and community resiliency. Corporate Service Corps is our nation's largest program of its kind, and it's deployed over 4,000 IBMers to 44 countries, completing over 1,400 projects. Our approach is consistent. IBMers apply the same skills and technologies used with commercial clients to support social organizations. We've continued to span this model through other initiatives. IBM Health Corps is similar to Corporate Service Corps, but aligned with our healthcare industry expertise, and work to improve cancer care using cognitive technologies. Our flagship Health Corps project supported the oncology community in sub-Saharan Africa to improve access to care. IBM teams have worked with the American Cancer Society, Care India, the Taiwan Centers for Disease Control, and others on projects that intend to reduce disparities in access to healthcare. Smarter Cities Challenge applied the Corporate Service Corps model to urban challenges, focusing on social equity, economic development, emergency management, and the environment. Launched in 2010, Smarter Cities sent IBM teams to 138 cities worldwide through 2017. Another initiative, IBM Impact Grants, provides shorter, 2-day consulting engagements on a wider scale. In 2018, we delivered 312 impact grants to nonprofit and educational organizations in 38 countries. IBM service initiatives continue to evolve and expand, but along a clear trajectory. We have expanded our business to integrate service, and in return, IBM sees a triple benefit. First, we intend to benefit communities with improved education, healthcare, disaster preparedness, or solutions to many other challenges. Second, we know that IBMers improve their teamwork and leadership skills. They value the opportunity to serve, and they want to work at a company that shares that value. Third, our company benefits from more skilled, engaged, motivated employees who are better prepared to lead a global organization. Sending IBMers on international service assignments offers the chance to lead multicultural teams, understanding emerging markets, and addressing pressing problems on a global scale. Third, that third benefit is critical because it means our service model is sustainable. These programs are not just charitable expenses, but investments in our people and, by extension, in our business. I'd like to conclude with a few words about partnerships, because the corporate service model wouldn't work without partners, nor could it be valuable or effective. With each engagement, IBM partners with social and educational organizations. They do the work of education or healthcare or any other social service, and our role is to help them be more effective. Through partners, we can have a much wider impact than we ever could on our own. We've also partnered with other companies on joint service engagements and to share our expertise to help them start their own programs. IBM has a long history of partnering with the US government agencies as well. I mentioned earlier that the Corporate Service Corps was inspired by the Peace Corps, but it's moved beyond inspiration. In 2016, IBM launched a global public-private partnership with the Peace Corps to collaborate on projects around the world. And since then, we've worked together with demonstrated results in Ghana, Peru, Mexico, and the Philippines. We've also partnered with the U.S. Agency for International Development on a 2-year initiative to create a center of excellence for international corporate volunteerism. Through this partnership, IBM sent 94 IBMers to work on USAID projects and contributed nearly $4 million of in-kind services. In closing, my message today is that the model of service is working for IBM. It's valued by our employees, and it's having a positive impact in the communities throughout our country and around the world. We remain committed to it and will continue to seek partnerships in corporate, governmental, and nonprofit sectors as we continue IBM's long, proud history of corporate citizenship. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. West. Ms. Walsh, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Heck and distinguished members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on leadership and service. I'm Teresa Walsh. I serve as the National Vice President of Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Boys and Girls Clubs of America is a network of 4,300 club sites that serve 4.3 million young people annually in 50 states, in large cities, small towns, public housing, military installations, and native lands. More than 58,000 professional staff members operate local clubs, supported by 349,000 board members and volunteers. Boys and Girls Club of America had its beginnings actually in 1860 with 3 women in Hartford, Connecticut. Believing that boys who roam the streets should have a positive alternative, they organized the first club. A cause was born due to a commitment of service in a community. Clubs are base building centered and led by professional staff. They offer youth development programs determined by necessities and available resources in local communities. They meet the interests of young people 6 to 18 years old. We focus on 3 priority areas: academic success, healthy lifestyles, and character and leadership. In a Harris survey of our alumni, 54% of alumni will tell you that the club literally saved their life. Boys and Girls Club of America research shows that young people who attend a club regularly tend to do better than their peers nationally. For instance, 68% of 12th graders volunteer at least once per month. This is compared to 39% of 12th graders nationally who do so. Youth who are involved with service are more likely as adults to have a strong work ethic, to volunteer, and to vote. Engagement in service also fosters the development of greater respect for others and understanding of citizenships that carry over into adulthood. Acts of service help youth develop compassion as they learn the value in giving and the importance of kindness. Our 2017 National Outcome Report tells us that 84% of our club members believe that they can make a difference in their communities. 92% of them say they want to help someone in need. Studies also show that youth involved in civic engagement programs attend school more frequently and are more likely to graduate than their peers who don't participate. We have 4 programs that focus on service and leadership: Youth of the Year, Keystone, Torch Club, and Million Members, Million Hours. In these programs, 356 service hours were provided by teens and tweens in this country last year. If you calculate that up, that's an impact of over $3.5 million in our country by teens and youth. Boys and Girls Club rely on community volunteers to provide an array of additional opportunities. In 2017, 349,000 volunteers provided mentoring and skill-based opportunities for young people. You can imagine without those, they might not have had the opportunity to participate. Boys and Girls Clubs have a long history of partnering with the federal government to help improve the lives of youth. Without these partnerships, which we leverage with additional support from the private sector, we know clubs could not reach as many young people as we do today. These programs, these partnerships help support not only the impact of youth, the youth that we serve, they also support a return of $9.60 on every dollar invested in a local Boys and Girls Club. For example, in 2018, Boys and Girls Club and the youth we serve have benefited from grant funding provided by the Department of Justice through the mentoring program. More than 9,000 mentors were recruited across the nation in local Boys and Girls Club. Federal funding received through 21st Century Community Learning Centers helps provide high-quality programming for kids K through 12th grade. This initiative is currently the only federal funding source dedicated exclusively to out-of-school time education programs. Additionally, for over 2 decades, Boys and Girls Club and the U.S. Armed Forces have partnered to help children and families face the unique challenges of military life. In 2017, some 510,000 youth were served at 484 BGCA affiliated military organizations worldwide. Finally, the AmeriCorps Vista program has supported clubs across the country, including support in Native communities. We serve nearly 90,000 Native youth, approximately in 200 clubs in 26 states, representing over 100 tribes in the United States. Particularly in a time of change in our country, we must work hard to protect and enhance the spirit of service volunteering. We must see that this service is a key to strengthening communities and America. There is no doubt that the government can provide an enabling framework to assist and incentivize service activity. Boys and Girls Clubs of America is committed to building an inclusive environment in which youth, teens, and volunteers can play a vital role in strengthening service across this country and ultimately making this country a better America. Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank all the panelists for both your oral and written testimony. We'll now proceed with commissioner questions. I'll put myself on the clock for 5 minutes. So the commission is considering several possible ways in which universal service, whether mandatory or not, could be implemented for America's young people. One approach is to commit enough resources so that any American with a desire to serve can participate in some form of service. As I mentioned in our opening comments, we call that universal access. In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges to universal access today, and how does your organization help individuals overcome those challenges? And so if we can go quickly, I'll start with Mr. Chaboya.
I would say one major challenges are student loan debt. I would say pressure from parents to get out into the workforce, and so being able to provide a vision of where the path of volunteering leads them in their own professional growth, that it's not a dead end, but in fact it could be a step going forward. And other types of resources, such as partnerships that we have with universities for reduced tuition for graduate programs that align with the work that they've been doing in their volunteer placements.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chaboya. Dr. Grimm.
I think one of the real challenges is creating more high-quality service opportunities. I think that we've got a lot more interest. The challenge is investing in high-quality opportunities, and the way to do that is to offer a variety of different opportunities that really taps each individual's passion, gets them involved in multiple service experiences, as I said before, provides ladders into they could see different kind of careers as entrepreneurs, public leaders, nonprofit leaders, and others that they could do. If we do those things, people will take advantage of them from our experience. But it needs to be adaptable, and I think we also have to provide support. I mean, just as one example, last example I'll give you, we have a Do Good Accelerator. One of the things we're doing this summer is you can get paid to do good. Your summer job as a college student can be working on a project or venture. Students need to make money, but they can make money, do good, and develop skills that allow them to make an impact in their local community and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. West?
Yeah, the only things that I would add there would just be, I think it's really about access and knowledge of understanding what's actually out there. You've heard from 4 panelists that have offered pretty diverse views around opportunities to engage and serve, and I'm not sure that everyone knows about that. So I think promotion is a big piece of this, and I think that also really demonstrating the value proposition of what service and volunteerism brings to the individual, and how that actually translates to building skills that can lead to meaningful employment as well.
Great. Ms. Walsh.
I would echo, I think one of the biggest challenges is the connection, is the application of how do I get connected with a volunteer opportunity that really gets me excited and enthusiastic about change in my community. The other would be potentially to increase the stipend, because college debt, as we know, is a barrier to young people volunteering.
I'm going to follow up Dr. Grimm if I can. You mentioned, increased access to high-quality opportunities. How would you define a high-quality opportunity?
All right. Well, it's a great question. So one is, I think it's an option that first allows a person to tap their passion. So for example, we offer these Do Good Now courses, and they have very important skills you're learning: design thinking, innovation, leadership. But you get to choose what project you're passionate about in those courses. And those courses are everywhere from, say, an arts to an engineering school. So adaptability, but also, making sure that they're a high-quality experience, an opportunity to make an impact today, so that you are motivated to keep going in those kind of activities, and then supports to build on them, because it's not just one service experience. The way we're going to build a generation and a country where everyone is engaging in service is you give them multiple high-quality service experiences, and you support them as they take next steps in their desire to serve their country and community.
Great, thank you very much. I'll yield back the balance of my time. Vice Chair Wada, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel for being here this morning. We all bring to this discussion a passion for service, and part of the commission is we're looking at whether we should make this a universal obligation, since we know that there are benefits to service and that there are secondary benefits. Would it be better for our country that we consider a universal obligation instead of voluntary obligation? And I was going to start with Mr. Chabot, but I'm going to start with Ms. Wells so we can.
Thank you for that. I think that when people are given an opportunity to choose, it seems to me it works better. And so when we say a mandatory volunteer, I do believe for high school, I believe that is different. I believe that there are 26 states that have mandatory requirements for volunteering to graduate that are tied to actual graduation, just not like a condition. So I do believe that's differently. But for adults, I believe allowing people to have a choice, but I believe it is all the platform we give them to choose around their passion and what it could directly impact their community at the biggest level.
Add to that, there are many pathways to service for Americans. So, whether it's with local organizations in your community, with faith-based institutions, places of employment, through government programs. I think the important point is that we provide opportunities to serve in whatever capacity that they're able. I think everyone's situation is different. And I think the more that we can do to promote the different ways that Americans can serve, the better off we'll be.
I want to echo the point about potentially focusing on high schools, because all Americans are needed to serve in their country and community. But even though I represent a university, many students, many young people will not go to college. And so I think it's important to think about if you can invest high quality, required kind of service experiences, multiple at high school. I think it'd be really valuable to do. The key is to invest in, as I talked about earlier, high quality experiences. If you make a service obligation that is not funded properly and people actually have negative experiences, it will be counterproductive. And so, we require young people to do well at math. There's so many reasons why requiring people to have a high quality service experience will also help them be successful in their careers and their community. And so requirement's not the problem, it's the quality of the experience that's the challenge.
I'm in favor of mandatory service within the school settings. Outside of that, I think it's about understanding what are the key incentives and obstacles that either prevent or draw people into service, and being able to focus on those so that we not only have middle and income volunteers, but we can also reach out to communities that we have not been as successful in getting involved in volunteering.
I want to continue this thought process. So if we were to consider, say, a service requirement of high schools, sort of the 13th year, do you think that there is a benefit in terms of a year of service or 6 months, 18 months? Is there a sort of sweet point in which someone actually, the light bulb goes off and the passion of service kicks in, based on your experiences?
I would say it's less a matter of time and more about the experience itself. And if that experience is hands-on, meaningful, and supported, then I think the time isn't as much of an issue.
I also am encouraging a ladder of service experiences, because I think that in order for someone to, for example, say, I want to do a year of service, first you need to have a variety of shorter, high-quality service experiences. So I would encourage thinking about kind of a ladder of service experiences in duration.
And I would go on to say to allow the youth, if it is high school, junior high, to have a voice in what it is, because they know what's needed in their community. We just sometimes fail to ask them that.
Great. And I don't want to leave Mr. West out. So from the corporate side, how, if a requirement on the high school level, is there a place for corporate responsibility in terms of participation?
It's interesting. Of course, we approach this from a little bit different angle, right? So, but we're very engaged at the high school level. And we actually offer opportunities for IBMers to volunteer as mentors to high schoolers, specifically around a program that we call PTech, which is a 9 through 14 education model that is combining high school and an associate's degree that is producing graduates with ICT skills to really meet the shortage of those kinds of skills in the United States. And it's been a very, very successful program, not just from the results that it's producing, but also from the ways that we can engage IBMers to be directly involved with mentoring these students as they're coming through. So not necessarily through a service perspective, but through a service opportunity for our employees to engage people of that age demographic.
Great, thank you. No time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses, both for your testimony today, as well as your commitment to and your leadership in service. I'd like to kind of pick up on where Ms. Wada was having the discussion with you, Mr. West, and that's in the area of corporations and how they view service. I think most people, when they think of corporations, they think of the roles that corporations have in our society, but also the obligation to return value to investors. The idea of service and how corporations can be part of our nation's service culture is something I'd like to explore. Could you please help us understand, what's in it for a corporation to become involved in community service? And are there lessons that can be learned from the experiences of companies like IBM that could relate to and be supportive of others in the private sector, especially as it relates to developing the workforce and keeping and retaining the best people?
Sure. I think at IBM we don't really make the distinction between our responsibility to shareholders and sort of making that a separate thing from our service programs or volunteerism programs. They're really one and the same. We've been doing this for a long time, and I think the reason that it's sustainable and the reason that it works is that we are providing impacting communities throughout the world, outcomes, but we're also getting something from that too, and that's okay. Providing these kinds of programs really helps us with recruitment. It helps us with retention. It helps us build leadership skills within our employees. And then it also fulfills a responsibility that we have to really engage in the communities where we live and work. I think that the studies will show that especially the millennials who are entering the workforce now will actually take a pay cut to work at a company that aligns with their social values. And we take that seriously, and I think that's been a competitive advantage for us.
Thank you, Mr. West. Dr. Grimm, first of all, I congratulate you on your product placement. You've got your Do Good Campus drinking water in front of you. But I was very interested in your testimony as you described kind of this process that exists in this Do Good Campus, where you have both collaborative effort as well as competitive types of programs that seem to spark innovation. And as we think about the need to look at more universal service in our country, and where would people serve, it seems that innovation and the ability to have innovative type programs could be a big part of that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned?
Yes, I think that the way to really spark universal service is to focus on the two twin areas of innovation, but also collaboration. Innovation is a team sport, And to do that, you've got to have a team of people who have a variety of different talents. And that's what we teach at the University of Maryland. But we also make it fun and competitive. I'd encourage all of you, if they have the time, to come to our Do Good Challenge. It's something we've been doing for 8 years. The next one's actually on April 25th, if I can mention that. And it's a cross between Shark Tank and American Idol. And the way to think about it is students can compete and win prizes for doing a cause that, for an existing cause, fundraising cause, advocacy cause, or they could create their own nonprofit or company. And the result of that is we've produced outcomes that have made state leaders invest in our effort, as well as private donors invest in our effort. I mean, just to give you one example, we had a recent Do Good Challenge winner who looked at the fact that there are numerous prescription drugs that get thrown away every year, even though they're still viable. They worked with a partnership with the FDA to get those retested and recovered, and they're distributing them to thousands of low-income individuals in South America. You know, it's those kind of innovations, as well as innovations that, as we saw in Do Good, create jobs, as well as solve major problems that I think can make a bigger tent of people to support service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Allard.
Appreciate very much the panelists being here. I know that it's a major investment of your time, but it also demonstrates the enthusiasm and desire and you know what to make it happen. I'm going to address my question to Ms. Walsh, if I may. As a previous board member of a Boys and Girls Club, I was unaware, frankly, that 3 wise women put this program together, and thank God for them, because it's an outstanding program. I'm showing a little bias here.
Thank you.
I also know that the Boys and Girls Clubs do everything they can in terms of their programming to help young people become caring and very passionate people about their communities. And they also do that to acquire skills that enable them to participate effectively in a democratic process. How do Boys and Girls Clubs provide access to service opportunities for your youth?
Well, first, thank you for service on the board. It is amazing how many people you come across daily that are either alumni or have served, so thank you for that. Each local Boys and Girls Club or affiliate are their own 501c. They have their own board. So for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, we're sort of that connecting agent, if you will. So we have, you know, of course, online through different staff across the country, there are opportunities for people to ask, how do I get engaged? That's why I said connectivity, because people say, I want to help, I just don't know how. So actually there's a portal where anybody can go on, put a zip code in, it takes them actually to their local Boys and Girls Club in their community with all the contacts there. And from there, most clubs have a volunteer coordinator, someone who coordinates the volunteer efforts that are occurring. And so that's a way that the adults can volunteer in the clubs. And then, of course, the youth who volunteer, we are big on youth voice, as you can imagine, so they select how they'll volunteer. And just to kind of piggyback on some of the things around the corporations, if you don't mind, is that many corporations today are looking at how do they take service and their skill sets into the private sector and into the Boys and Girls Club to create opportunities for employment based on volunteer experiences. And we're very, very thankful for companies like IBM who do that.
Excellent, thank you. What are some of the best practices you've discovered the Boys and Girls programming used to instill the values of service in young people?
Early, really early. I don't know if anybody on the panel is a member of a Boys and Girls Club. My guess is yes, because 19 out of every 19 people you meet, one will be. So at Boys and Girls Clubs at 6 years old, everybody has a role. You do something to be able to help. So we actually have service embedded throughout all our curriculum and throughout every day in a Boys and Girls Club. And as they become older, they do service projects in the community with an adult, of course. And as they get older, the programs I mentioned, the 4 programs, are sort of a laddered approach where they start from before, like 10 years old, where they're actually picking what they're going to do in their community and making a difference. And some of our teenagers, of course, do international projects. And that goes back to what some of the other panel members have mentioned around passion and of course, results in what we see, a creation of jobs and what their passion is going to be for the future, so they can be self-supporting, great citizens in this country.
Fantastic. Would you, I'm intrigued by the fact that a 10-year-old comes up with an idea of doing a service program. I'd be very interested in hearing an example of.
I would love to give you an example, and I'll tell you exactly where. Texas, yeah. A young person, actually, she was 9 years old, and had been to a class of Boys and Girls Clubs on fruits and vegetables, and quite frankly, we all know how expensive those are, so she hadn't had those. The club director and some of the staff heard this, talked to her, and she said, we could have a garden. I bet it's really expensive to have a garden, isn't it? We all know it isn't. So story from that moment to the end, the kids had their own garden at the Boys and Girls Club. They harvested their own peppers, their own salsa, tomatoes, and actually started a company and sold the salsa at the farmer's market. And then, of course, the donors who gave to that particular club all got salsa as a gift. You can imagine that worked out pretty well. But that's just one around innovation and what young people, and when I talk about youth voice and what kids really need, they know what they need. We just sometimes fail to ask them.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank
no
you.
time.
Ms. Davidson, you're recognized.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming today. My first question is for Dr. Grimm. Your program is intriguing. I'm hearing you speak, I'm reading your materials, and it sounds as though you think this is a type of program that could be scaled across the country and other universities, or maybe even beyond. I know that you raised a decent amount of money to get started, and I'm curious about how you were able to bring so many different types of partners to the table to launch the program. If you could talk a little bit about that. And then in particular, given the role the commission has, what can the federal government do to achieve your vision of scaling this across other universities?
All right, so that's a lot of questions. Those are great questions. I'll try to hit them briefly. What I would say is that we have the Do Good campus, and our efforts in the University of Maryland are quite robust today. But only a few years ago we started where we didn't have one class, we didn't have anything, and we just had a little seed money and perhaps a crazy idea that we could influence and harness the power of a whole campus to do good. And some of the keys to doing that, I think any higher education institution could do as well. We made sure that every course we created early on was adaptable and worked with kind of the demands of the different schools and colleges there, whether it's social science or arts. We made sure that students had experiences that were way out of the norm. So you walked into a class, you might have an idea for how you want to change the world, or maybe you just want to change the world, but you don't know how you want to do it. And in the class, you would actually develop your idea and pilot it, execute it, and your final exam would be pitching what you've achieved so far, and you could win additional small amounts of money and coaching to further advance it. That's a very different kind of educational experience than many students experience, but it started building a lot of momentum. And then when we launched the Do Good Challenge, I mean, when we went out, we had, actually, I'll let you know, we had Kevin Bacon, not a Maryland alum, who was willing to do the first Do Good Challenge with us. He did a video challenge Maryland students make the biggest impact they could. We didn't know what kind of response we were going to get. 100 different teams competed the first year. And now thousands of students are competing every year in this Do Good Challenge. That's something that any kind of campus could do, and it's exciting because you're actually paying for success. because the prizes go to the most compelling groups, and then you can help support them even more, and you're inspiring others. And so those, some exciting classes, a challenge, and you can build a lot of momentum. And talk about some of the results I'm doing. I think the federal government could do a couple of things. One is really invest in models that engage service across the whole high school or whole college campus and harness the whole power of the campus. Don't let service be just one nice thing that's happening and maybe in one part of a high school or a university. And two, I'd encourage the commission to explore national prize competitions for innovations, exciting challenges, or even something like a national Do Good Challenge. I mean, one of the genius things I think of it, and I didn't come up with the name Do Good Challenge, one of our students did, is that everyone can see themselves as doing good. And everyone could see themselves competing, being excited, and whether you're going to be a citizen and engage in service for a lifetime, whether you're going to be an innovator or entrepreneur, or you're going to be a public leader or a nonprofit leader, you all could see yourself in the do good model. And thank you.
I yield my time.
Ms. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel for sharing your time with us this morning and your expertise. I'd like to start with Mr. Chaboya. I'd like to understand if there are specific challenges with faith-based organizations. So, for example, are there particular challenges attracting and working with individuals that are aligned to other faiths to a particular faith-based organization?
Yeah, so Jesuit Volunteer Corps recruits mainly on Catholic college campuses, although we do have volunteers that come from secular institutions or other institutions that have different faith tradition roots. The commitment that we ask from any volunteer who comes into the program is the willingness to struggle with the issues, to reflect on those issues, and to try to understand what this is saying about where this experience is calling them in their future careers. So while the framework in which this is done is often within a faith-based context, we try to adapt it in such a way that it's friendly, usable, and just understandable to those who don't necessarily or aren't embedded in their faith tradition themselves. It's really about discerning, reflecting, and understanding their experience.
So if I could just follow up, from your experience, are relationships with individual houses of worship or individual faiths really, are they necessary? Does it enhance the experience for the individual who aligns with a faith-based organization?
No, I would say the main the way that it impacts the individual in the program is really where they are serving and the collective experience of the volunteers who are living together. They're all in different placements, they're all doing different types of work. And so it really is those organizations that they're working with that draw the volunteers in, expand their vision, and bring them to different types of work than they may otherwise have been exposed to.
Thank you. Dr. Grimm, could you talk a little bit about how you and your institute attract students, University of Maryland students who are not associated with your institute, who may be pursuing other majors, for example, your journalism majors, your engineering majors? How do you attract them to service opportunities, and how do you inspire them to serve alongside those folks that are in your institution?
So one of the things I'd say is that we view our goal to reach every student at the University of Maryland. And one of the ways to do that is we actually are working to incorporate do-good curriculum in general education courses so that students of any kind of major could have experiences around innovation, understanding social issues, and how they could make an impact. The other thing is we work with every school and college and different faculty members to adapt our curriculum so that it could be available for different majors. You mentioned journalism students. So for example, a few years ago, we had a Do Good Challenge winner that was from a group of students who were taking a class with Professor Dana Priest, who's a two-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and a member of our Do Good Council. They studied journalists who were falsely imprisoned abroad just for doing their job. Their Do Good Challenge project in class was actually developing an advocacy effort focused on those journalists falsely imprisoned abroad. They developed partnerships with the New York Times, the HBO, and they have ultimately credited with helping free multiple journalists abroad. The key is, again, we worked with, within the confines of the academic curriculum of the journalism school to support a project like that. So the key is to grow it across every kind of discipline, is to be willing to figure out what are your core principles, and then what things are adaptable to make it any major, any student of any interest to be involved in doing good. Thank you.
I yield back.
Mr. Kilgannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to address my first question to Dr. Grimm and Mr. Cibola. You mentioned about having service in high school, and I think you both spoke favorably to having that be a mandatory or required activity. Who would set that requirement? Would that be the federal government, the states, localities?
I would think that each institution, understanding that there is a service requirement within sort of a broad framework, would then set sort of how they manage that within their own setting, giving the student body that they have, given the community that they're in, given the relationships that they have, that if they're provided a broad framework, then the institution can figure out what makes most sense given their own setting.
But the requirement itself would be set by the state?
I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't know. I don't have an opinion on that at this moment.
I would encourage the commission to explore the potential of all three of those options. It could be a local requirement, it could be a state requirement. Perhaps there is a way to imagine even some kind of federal requirement. But I think the key is kind of what Tom said. You've got to make sure that those requirements are adaptable to each kind of different schools, the expectations, and make sure those service requirements are core to the curriculum of those schools, and that they are also doing the other things we talked about, high impact, multiple experiences. I mean, the last question asked, how do you get students from all kinds of different areas to really be excited about doing this? You create the kind of educational experiences that students are hungering for. I mean, one of our challenges is we have lots of courses at Maryland that have wait lists, and we're trying to figure out how to offer even more classes because students want those kind of experience. So I think you could explore some kind of requirement, but the opposite is equally important. What's really important is you invest in high quality opportunities that students are demanding.
And where does service fit in the school day in this sense? We ask a lot of students. We ask them to learn math and science, physical education. One of the takeaways that the commission has had in the time we've traveled the country is a deficiency in civics education. So in a sense, it's a zero-sum game. If you put something else in, something's got to give. What would give in your mind?
So I think this kind of raises the issue that this at the local setting is not just a cookie cutter approach. So you just can't take one model and apply it. If it's done well, to really answer your question, I think it really needs to be integrated into the curriculum in such a way that it does advance, certain objectives at the school, whether it's around history, whether it's around science, whether it's around whatever the discipline may be, that they're able to take that experience and bring it back to the classroom and apply it given what they're learning in their daily class lives.
And I just underscore that point by saying I don't think it has to be a zero-sum if you're incorporating hands-on service opportunities that also are core to the other academic skills you're teaching. So how can that service experience, for example, if you're teaching robotics, how could you do something that would actually create a robotic for good or robotic social impact effort? That's not taking away from other class time. It's actually enhancing it because you're allowing them to take their knowledge and apply it today and make an impact in their community.
And Ms. Walsh, I wanted to ask, in your testimony, you spoke about the Boys and Girls Clubs influencing healthy lifestyles. And you specifically talked about 91% of ninth graders abstaining from marijuana use. Thank you for that. What challenges have you all seen in trying to promote that restriction, that non-use of marijuana in states where marijuana has been legalized?
Now, that is a tough question and a great one right now because, as you know, there's several states that have just adopted that. It has become, and I'll just take Colorado for instance, because that was one of the early adopters, or California. It has proven to be difficult. I think the programs that we've turned to in those situations are fact-based. Here's the science behind this, and here is what happens, especially at a young age when young people who their brains are in the process of developing, the damage that can be done from that. And the research is out there. If we're very factual, I mean, with visuals, you know, and say, here's what will happen, and lay that out, most young people will make the choice, hopefully the right choice. But I do, as more states take this on, I think it is going to be an opportunity for us nationally to address mental health at a much younger age going forward.
Mr. Casey.
Thank you all for your own commitment to service. This is a great panel with a lot of terrific information. I also want to build off of what you each said about high school with this question. So one of the things we've been looking at is potentially recommending that the second semester of senior year in high school, often known as senior spring, become a service semester as a capstone. And I really appreciate what you said, Dr. Grimm, about really leveraging the whole high school experience. Would love your opinions on, do you think that's a good idea for us so it would become part of just the capstone for graduation? People would do an intensive service learning project where they'd be learning but also really engaging in community service in their communities. Do you think that's a good idea? And if you do, what would you recommend to implement that to make it successful? And if you don't, tell us why you don't like it. Why don't we start with Mr. Chabola?
Well, I guess I'll speak as a parent. I would have valued if the last semester of either of my daughter's years was service focused. But again, it goes back to the question in terms of, you know, how those experiences are structured so that they're not only service experiences but learning experiences, so that it's not seen as a wasted year, wasted time, but really builds on the work that the student has been doing throughout their high school experience.
Yeah, I think in my view, the way it would work better is if you have engaged the high schooler in multiple service experiences to that capstone, so that it is building on the experiences that they've had. I also might encourage you to explore the ability of flexibility, where a student could do their capstone even earlier than their last semester of high school. In Maryland, there's a number of interesting innovations to try to help young people get involved in their community even earlier. We have a couple communities that are allowing 16-year-olds to vote. For example. So you could imagine offering capstone experiences then when they're 16, 17, or 18, and make it part of a very integrated multiple service experience in high school. Thank you.
So I think, you know, looking at this from an employer point of view, I think that we are always looking for skills that are provided by service opportunities, but I would agree that that really does need to be mixed with some sort of learning component. If, you know, a large percentage of jobs that will be available 20 years from now don't actually exist yet, you know, we need to be constantly making sure that the innovations that are being made at a high school level or even younger are very much mixed with opportunities to help build those skills that'll help us compete in a global economy in the future. So while, you know, it's a very, very important skill set and the soft skills that it brings, you know, mixing it with a learning opportunity as well, I think, is vital.
I would agree on the workforce opportunities for skill-based also, and a caution, because as we know, every school district in the country, every state has different levels of capacity right now, and we have some states that, you know, their education system are truly struggling, and to have the infrastructure to support that, because if it's not done sort of in a structured way, especially, let's say you have 300 seniors, you know, and it's their second semester, and some get a great experience and some it's not so much. Having the infrastructure to support that, I think, is critical in ensuring that it turns out to be a great experience for that young person and the community that's going to be impacted by that.
Terrific, thank you. Dr. Grimm, I'm really impressed with what you've done with the Do Good Institute. Curious, a lot of college students are now looking at, after they graduate from high school, doing a service year or gap year before going to college. Are you doing anything to support that, encourage that, and what could institutions of higher education do to facilitate that or encourage it as a way to incentivize young people post-high school before college?
Well, I appreciate your kind remarks, and I do want to emphasize that everything about Do Good is a big team effort, and it's just my privilege to be here to talk about it. We aren't really doing as much about a gap year effort, but I will tell you one of the things that we are doing that I think educational institutions, particularly colleges and universities, should look at is thinking about how we're going to support our alums after they graduate. In fact, one of the new things that we're doing with the Do Good Institute is offering programs that are explicitly for our students and alums, and ways that we can support them in continuing on in their service and innovation efforts for a lifetime. Because we believe our goal is to get people engaging and doing good for a lifetime. Thank you.
I yield the balance of my time.
Ms. Skelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chaboy, I wonder if you could please offer your thoughts as the leader of a faith-based service organization as to how you view interactions with secular, either government or corporate, or even other service organizations that are not faith-based. Are there any particulars with regard to relationships, how you establish relationships and maintain working relationships from your organization's perspective?
Yeah, so we seek to connect and collaborate with service organizations across the board, to learn, what's working for them, both in terms of recruiting, attracting, retaining volunteers. So there is, I think, significant learning, and for Jesuit Volunteer Corps, I think we probably could be doing more to learn from other organizations. We are partnering with organizations that are providing us with AmeriCorps volunteers and other similar organizations. So it's pushing us to think more broadly in terms of what we do in order to support, attract, and retain a volunteer network within our organization.
Thanks. I'd like to perhaps flip it or spin it just a little bit with the rest of the panelists, starting with Dr. Graham, as to what your thoughts are as to the relationships in the place of faith-based organizations, other larger, broader organizations like Mr. Chaboy's, and then also many just local parishes, churches, faith organizations as well are such a part of the service fabric of America.
I'll just say very briefly that I think religious organizations are one of the real building blocks of community and service. More people today volunteer, give through religious organizations than through any other kind of organization. And so I think it's very important as you think about how to grow service broadly, that religious organizations have to be a very important collaborator and partner.
Thank you. Mr. West, with regard to how corporations, either yours or just broadly, interact with or think about partnerships or relationships with faith organizations.
Sure. So, we really want to meet IBMers where they are. And so if that's an opportunity to volunteer and engage with a faith-based organization that they are affiliated with or engaged with, that's something that we want to support. I think that sort of the broader conversation about partnerships and really building on Ms. Davidson's question about barriers and opportunities for the federal government to help sort of increase pathways to service. I do think that the federal government can play a really key role in being a convener, and that being that convener to help scale. We've done partnerships with the nonprofit sector, with faith-based, with government, and with other for-profits, on and on. But a lot of that are sort of like one-off opportunities, and to the extent that the federal government can provide opportunities that break down barriers to partner with government, and to make it easier to, and I say this having spent 10 years in federal public service as well, specifically in public-private partnerships. The government can really play a key role in being that convener, especially in the area of public service, but broadly. So I've just had that.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Of course, boys and girls clubs are inclusive environments where, religious beliefs aren't really, we welcome every young person. You might be surprised to learn that boys and girls clubs are in churches all over this country. For, the great reason, they're huge buildings with all the fun stuff that kids like to do already in them, and they aren't being used from 3 to 8 every single day. Our oldest partner actually is the Salvation Army. So we've been affiliated with the Salvation Army for over 50 years. We have boys and girls clubs across this country in Salvation Army buildings doing boys and girls club programming. So we don't see it as a barrier, and every community is different. We see it as a definite opportunity to provide to partner in a way that helps local communities and kids.
Thank you, and thank you all so very much. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we'll proceed with our second round of questions, and I'll start off by asking Mr. West. Could you envision a private sector implementing a service model akin to like academic sabbaticals? Let's say, so for every certain period of time spent working at a corporation or a business, that individual would get a period of time off to be able to go and perform a service type project. What are the benefits and downsides of such a program, and what would be needed to incentivize a company to sponsor something along those lines?
Sure, so I can envision it. We do offer that as a company. As I mentioned in my testimony, we have a program called Corporate Service Corps, which I think is very akin to a sabbatical type program. So you spend 3 months of doing virtual online training with IBMers from all over the world, and then you spend 4 weeks, the bulk of which in emerging market countries, to work on a service project. We do this primarily through implementing NGOs that come and set up programs. They help coordinate on safety and security. They develop monitoring and evaluation components, KPIs. And then what that really enables us to do is build this very, and it may not sound like it, but life-changing experience for IBMers. They actually get back to their day jobs and want to learn new ways that they can continue to engage. And it's been a profoundly successful program for us. It's a challenge, to be honest. Convincing the acceptance rate in the Corporate Service Corps for IBM is something akin to like Ivy League. It's a very competitive process, and not a lot of people get in. We have people apply over and over and over again. And so because you're drawing that kind of talent from across the company, you then have to convince their manager, hey, let your best person on your team go, not only to spend 3 months of training in addition to their core responsibilities, but then to leave their job completely. They're really not supposed to be checking in on email. They're supposed to leave it completely and focus on the project. That's a tough sell. And for that reason, there aren't a lot of companies that provide that amount of service, that amount of time in terms of the service projects they do through pro bono consulting or corporate volunteerism, or however you want to term it. So, we've done this to varying degrees of time off for these sabbaticals, if we want to call them that. We've done it at an executive level for smaller amounts of time, and we've piloted projects like that. I think the through line for all of this is that we're providing these opportunities, whether it's a day to go volunteer in your community, and we provide we provide over 64 toolkits that make it very easy for IBMers to go in and apply their skills to a specific nonprofit or educational institution, or whether it's an extensive training process for something like Corporate Service Corps. I do think that these sabbaticals, while they do exist, they're probably not prevalent enough. And I think that we can help articulate what the business case for that is. It's been something that's been profoundly successful for us.
So when they're doing their 3 months of training, are they still doing their day job? And that's okay. And then on average, they go for a 4-week service experience. How many positions do you sponsor annually in that regard?
Right now, we're probably at 500 a year. We're looking to maybe double that number here in the next 12 months. And then we're also looking to expand the ways that we offer our corporate service corps program. So we've just celebrated our 10th anniversary last year of corporate service corps. As I mentioned, we've had over 4,000 IBMers go through this program. But we want to figure out what are ways that we can actually engage that alumni base that come back to their day jobs. We're a technology company. Are there ways that we can actually use our technology to provide, virtual consulting on projects? How can we build ways and opportunities for them to stay involved with the projects that they were, associated with and working on? And so, we feel very proud, I think, about our corporate service corps model, and it's something that we've taught other major corporations to do. They've set up programs based on using ours as a model. In fact, this has been taught in MBA schools around the world. But we can always be innovating and creating new opportunities so we can really scale that number.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Wada.
Thank you. I just want to continue that thought process because corporations, and maybe even for Dr. Grimm, and nonprofit organizations like schools, it's sort of like the bottom line, right? How do you make it cost effective? What's the payback to the company or to the university? How do you develop the factors upon which you're assessing the effectiveness of these programs that you can then make the case to, say, your bosses or the American people?
Good question. And I think demonstrating the ROI is the real challenge around all of these programs, right? So, and we do it from a number of different ways. So we need to measure impact in the communities that we're working and make sure that we're actually delivering the results, because that's something that we can take back and say, to our senior leadership and say, look, this is the impact that we're actually making. So we have to be very sure that we're accurately measuring what that impact is. And then looking internally, we need to be measuring the impact on the actual IBMers experience. So that's something that we do in close coordination with our human resources department. We do extensive surveys. We talk to their managers. We come back and survey them at later points in their career to figure out how this actually helped them on their journey and their professional journey. And so, we need to be looking at this through, a number of different, I think, pretty diverse lenses in terms of measuring impact. But at the end of the day, what this takes is buy-in from your senior leadership. We have a chairman and CEO that values this program, that places resources in this program and invests in our business unit to, administer this program, provide opportunities for IBMers. And without the support from your senior leadership, these things don't happen. And so we have to continue to make the case, not only anecdotally through stories and the power of telling stories, but also real data and what that data actually means for both the IBMer and the company, but also the communities that they're working in.
Dr. Grimm, from the sort of education nonprofit side?
Yeah, thank you very much. One thing I would say is that similar to employees, what you want to do at a university or educational institution is you want to make sure you're providing experiences that students are demanding it. So creating those high quality experiences where students want it, deans and other people want it in their schools. I mean, I'm not going to say specific names, but I have multiple deans in my school say, I want my students to win the Do Good Challenge, for example, right? So a healthy spirit of kind of excitement around that. And then I think impact is so important. Illustrating the kind of impact, and perhaps impact that people often don't think about for service, by focusing on economic development, innovation. So just to give you an example, just last week I was at the opening for one of our alums' 15th market for their company, Imperfect Produce, which sells ugly produce. We actually have 2 companies that have come out of Do Good that are selling ugly produce. They've recovered about 52 million pounds of produce, but they're also hiring lots of thousands of good jobs at the same time. I mean, what kind of government leader doesn't want to support service programs that are making innovation, say, in their state or their country or their city, creating jobs, and also solving some of the biggest challenges we have out there, such as hunger and food waste, as an example? Thank you.
For Mr. Chabola and Ms. Walsh, we heard a little earlier about the declining volunteerism in our country. I'm wondering, from your both organizations, since you depend upon volunteers, one is, are you seeing that in your own organizations? And if so, how are you addressing sort of that decline? And are there ways that we can sort of, I guess, increase volunteerism in America?
Yeah, we are seeing a decline in applicants, and one of the things I think is similar across volunteer organizations is that involvement is sort of countercyclical to the economy. So when the economy is good, there's a lot of jobs. That's where students will go out of college. So that's one thing. And so what could be done? Again, it's the types of incentives that are put out there. Again, students coming out with student debt, that they can see a clear pathway, that the volunteer year is not a dead end, but in fact, it's a step forward. I just talked to a volunteer in New Orleans. She came in, she made a choice between Jesuit Volunteer Corps or a job on Wall Street. She's doing a legal services placement. She now wants to either go to law school or be a caseworker. So it does provide a transformative experience.
For teens and tweens in clubs, we're not seeing it decline because we have a system and a program in place. For millennials volunteering, yes, we do see a decline, and I think it is directly linked to student loans because most of them work a job and potentially a gig, if you will, the gig environment that we're in right now.
Mr. Barney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this issue of universal service, as we've traveled around the country, what we've heard from Americans is that we as Americans, we don't like to be told what to do. We value freedom. And yet, as we look at the current service situation here, especially some of the information in your testimony, Dr. Graham, about the trends that do not suggest that being freedom-loving Americans are actually bringing more people into service, we have a national problem. And we're looking to establish a nation where people are inspired and eager to serve. So when I saw your testimony, Mr. Chaboya, one of the things that you described for the Jesuit Volunteer Corps recruits is their passion, their willingness to meet difficult challenges with integrity, faith, unflinching response, and how they bring their values and a sense of humility into service. So aside from the incentive part of this, I wonder if each of you could touch briefly on the idea of how do we instill, at a very young age perhaps, in Americans this kind of passion that allows them to overcome some of the other challenges? And I'd start with you, Mr. Chaboya.
So as Ms. Walsh mentioned at the beginning, engaging people at a very young age so that it becomes a habit that they see in their life. And I would say secondly, it really is about the quality of experience that they engage in. If it's an experience that puts them in direct contact with the people being served, if they're giving an opportunity to really sort of unpack that experience and learn from it, then it can be transformative, and I think it will lead to future service. If it's not done well, then the exact opposite will happen.
Dr. Graham?
I think those are probably some of the key points, honestly, that I would make. The other thing I'd say is that on this question, I think we require a lot of things of young people who we are certain it's good for them. Service, we're certain it's good for them if they get high quality experiences. So I think the requirements, the issue. I think choices is important, and you can do that in the curriculum in a way that taps people's passion. But I think that we need to recognize that right now we're experiencing a country where a lot less people are volunteering, a lot less people are giving, and our communities lose so much by having less people engaged in them. And secondly, individuals lose a lot from health to work benefits from not doing that.
Thank you. Mr. West, you have both the private sector understanding of this challenge as well as your service that you did in the Peace Corps. Can you help us understand what can we do as a nation to inspire more to serve?
Sure. I think it's about making the connection of what is in it for the person. I think you really do need to demonstrate that value and draw the connection between how this specific experience isn't just something that's good to do, but how it's going to help you build skills that will translate to your professional career and otherwise. I think that sometimes people think that this is a binary choice, that you're sort of putting this on hold to go volunteer. You're putting college on hold. You're putting work on hold to go volunteer. And I think that a better connection could be made about how this, point A gets you to point B. As you mentioned, I joined the Peace Corps straight out of college. I did that because I had experiences volunteering with the Make-A-Wish Foundation in college, which sort of gave me the bug to want to serve. But I did that for selfish reasons too. I wanted to learn a new language. I wanted to build multicultural skills. I wanted to be able to work in a multicultural environment. And I knew that that would help me on my path to a career and make me stand out in terms of other applicants that were applying for jobs straight out of college. And I think that that's effective. I think that you do need to make that connection and not make this solely just an output of what your duty or your responsibility to society is. I think that it's okay to make that connection of what you get out of it.
Mr. Chairman, I know we just have a few seconds left. I wonder if I could allow Ms. Walsh to continue with the 150 years of experience of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I'm very much interested in your thoughts on this important issue.
Yeah, I'm going to flip the script a little bit on what volunteerism is and how what I have seen, and actually I sit on a committee, a group of people looking at displaced workers as automation increases and things happen in life, to piggyback on what Mr. West said, where an employee is going to be displaced, the company knows about it, it's a platform set up so that volunteers can look at, hey, what are some skills that I may be able to gain if I do this volunteer service? Of course, these are pretty high level, like strategic planning or data analyzation, some things like that. And so how do we really show the outcome of being able to gain a new experience while volunteering in a Boys and Girls Club around really high-performing professionals through no fault of their own? They have lost their job. And so we are seeing great benefit in that, working in the nonprofit sector to, place people who might, the local individuals or the local leaders there might not have that skill set. So that is, I was hoping I would get to say that today, but that is one way of looking at volunteerism and service in a way I don't think we've done in this country or businesses have done as employees are displaced. Because a lot of people, in the end game say, what have I done in my career that has truly, truly made a difference? So they kind of look to us soft-hearted people in the nonprofit world and say they're always happy. Why are they happy? Well, we're happy because we're serving, so there's a connection there.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Mr. Allard.
Yes, Chairman. As I'm sitting here listening to your stories, which have been fascinating, by the way, I'm curious. We got a little bit of insight from Mr. West about what motivated him to serve. I'd like to know what the others of you, and you kind of brushed against it a little bit too, Ms. Wells. Please, sir. What motivates you to serve?
So I would say it's the very early experiences that I had watching my parents, volunteer at church, volunteer in the community, where I went to high school, we were encouraged on weekends to take part in community activities. So again, it was sort of ingrained, this culture of volunteerism, and again, me being able to see the value for myself as a person in my own growth and development.
Thank you.
Well, I grew up in a very rural part of Iowa, which I like to joke, some people might say isn't the entire state rural. But my town had 5,000 people, and my grandparents grew up in a town, 300 people. And in that town, they had a passion for theater. And what I saw as a kid is they were able to convince some professors from Iowa State University to open up a professional theater company in the abandoned dairy creamery in this town of 300 people. And for 30 to 40 years, it was the only professional theater company in the state of Iowa. And I went to it all the time as a kid. I saw how that town surrounded it, how my grandparents were role models for service. And it's a motivation that I have every day. I've got them on, my picture of them on my fireplace, and every day I think about how they were able to do next to the impossible in their community through service. And that's what I think motivates me in myself. And I just want to emphasize one last point from the last question. I really think that the Commission should in no way feel uncomfortable appealing to self-interest to grow service, because self-interest, people get all kinds of benefits, actual and non ones you can see, from doing service. So appealing to self-interest, I think, is a winning strategy to help grow service.
Thank you, Dr. Grimm. Mr. West, anything you'd like to
Just add one quick thing. I shared my experience, but I do think it's important to note what motivates IBMers in their day-to-day jobs. So, beyond the programs that I've talked about this morning, central to our core business competencies, we're using artificial intelligence to help combat human trafficking. We're using blockchain technology to help reduce plastic that's going into the ocean. We've recently required the weather company. We have access to all of that data. Think about the potential that we have in terms of helping to mitigate risk around natural disasters. It's what we do as a core business, I think, that causes IBMers to wake up and come to work with a sense of purpose. And it's programs like the ones that we work in corporate citizenship that really marries service programs, volunteer programs, and opportunities for IBMers. But it all has to tie back to what our business does, and I think that we have a very good story to tell around that too.
Mine would be opportunities and expectations. As you can tell, I'm from the South. I know you wouldn't have guessed that. But service has been part of what my family has always done. As a former Department of Defense educator, a military wife, a probation officer at one time, I too want to do something so at the end of my days I can say I truly, truly made a difference. And when you get to work with 4.3 million people across the U.S. and internationally, it's a pretty good place to be. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lard. Ms. Davidson.
So I'd like to share some of the when we talk about service, I feel like a lot of times the lines get very blurred. And some of the things I'm hearing today also blur the lines. That's not a bad thing necessarily. At the core, I think one of the things we've discovered as commissioners is the value of service of all kinds, not just at the individual level, but at the societal level, right? Civil society, the strengthening of that. And one of the things I heard today, I think it was Dr. Grimm and maybe Chabala about, well, a lot of you talked about the decline of people serving. And I want to question that a little bit. Is that for real? Because, when you think about this, the root of service being about civil society, and we think about America, and you've read de Tocqueville and Putnam, and, de Tocqueville said we were a nation of joiners, and, Putnam did this work that said, well, maybe we're not as much anymore. And he quantified things like people joining Lions clubs and Rotary and Masons and the decline in those kinds of things in his book, Bowling Alone. We're not joining these bowling clubs anymore. But even at the time I thought, but we're doing other stuff, right? And so I wonder, it's kind of a bit of a two-part question. On the one hand, the data that you all are tapping into, does it tap the IBMers? Because are you looking at sort of the traditional volunteerism? Because I am seeing a lot more, and I think we all have on this commission, we've talked to a lot of some major corporations that have similar programs to what Mr. West has talked about today. And at my local community in Denver, these companies, number one, it's part of their DNA, like they think it's part of their corporate strategy, culture, and identity to do this kind of thing for all the reasons that you talked about. And number two, because they say, especially the millennials, are kind of demanding it. They're okay working in the for-profit sector, but they want to think that the place they work has a soul, right? That they're out there doing good. So I guess that's my question. How should we be thinking about this? We've categorized military, national, public service, but you guys are blurring the lines. Do the data include this corporate stuff that we're talking about? And if not, how do we capture that?
Well, I really appreciate your question because one of the things I'll admit, is I am a data nerd, and I enjoy data, and I got to be a director of research and policy development at the Corporation for National Community Service. One of the things I would emphasize is the commission should really look at how are you ensuring the federal government is investing in high-quality data on all the important issues that you're looking at. The data that we're using should include work such as IBM, because we were able to add volunteer and other civic engagement questions. We actually worked with Bob Putnam and others to add questions to what is the monthly current population survey, which produces the monthly unemployment rate. It actually goes out to about 110,000 households. It's an incredible data set. That's how I'm able to talk about trends in states. And one of my partners, Dr. Nathan Dietz, is here. We can even talk about trends in 200 and some cities. I want to encourage you to really think about what kind of data do you want going forward, and that the government is collecting it regularly, because the way to drive change in all the different areas we're talking about for service is to be able to provide benchmark data that can show you, is it increasing or decreasing in everywhere from Reno to Des Moines to Virginia Beach.
So I'm sorry, but again, you say you do sort of count those things, but part of your program, you say you can do good and also do well by starting a company that has a soul. Do those count?
I mean, not in every kind of data would all those things count. So you'd have to add a lot of different data sets. One of the things I will emphasize, and of course I only had 5 minutes to talk about the research, was that there are multiple Indiana universities putting out data that's showing that charitable giving has declined significantly over the last 2 decades, along with research the Do-Good Institute and others. So there's a lot of different data out there that's suggesting that we are experiencing decline since 9/11. But I do also think that rarely does a data say how many new entrepreneurs are we creating that are making a social impact. Those are some new areas that I think, not the data I'm talking about collects, but I think that the commission should find a way the federal government is collecting good trend data on all the different forms of service that we're interested in.
Thank you. Mr. Chabala.
So I'm not a data nerd, so I'm glad there are those around. But I would maybe encourage us to think about the distinction between full-time service and part-time service. Service at a young age, service when you're more already in the workforce, and sort of what are the trends there, and what are the different approaches to encourage those different strands of service?
Yeah, I love this question. So, and I know it's not necessarily intended for, exclusive sort of a private sector point of view, but, when we're looking at blurring those lines, I think that the phase that we're in as a company now is that we want to erase that line completely. I think if you look at our historical approach to, social impact or this kind of work, we used to send money, and then we sent equipment, and then we sent the time and talent of our workforce, which I've talked a lot about this morning. And I think now we're trying to sort of marry all of those things, but make them more closely aligned with the business, because our core competency as a business brings social impact. That sense of giving back is real with our employees. I mentioned sort of 3 ways that we're doing that, but I could mention another 50. We just released a report on the Sustainable Development Goals to talk about how we are advancing the 17 goals, not only through programs like we work on in corporate citizenship, but in our products and services. And so, what we are really trying to do is erase that line completely. We know that, our major stakeholders want this information. They want, a company like IBM to behave this way. So we talked about, employees that want to work at a company that is aligned with their social values, but investors now are requiring more non-financial data, and they're evaluating companies on that kind of data. Clients are requiring, through the RFP process, how you're making an impact, how you're not doing harm. That started primarily in Europe, but that's proliferating to new geographies, every week, and we're helping to support that way. So we are plenty incentivized to do this kind of work as a company. And when you talk about the lines between service and between, turning a profit, we want to erase that completely and marry the two.
And I will piggyback because we hear this from corporations everywhere. It's sort of blurred, Teresa. We, I'm sure, could do a better job on the analytics. 4,300 clubs of varying who is volunteering and who isn't. So I believe we have an opportunity to dig a little deeper in this ourselves around what is happening in clubs across the U.S., both corporately and with the teens and tweens and their impact.
Thank you.
Ms. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Previously, I think, Ms. Welch, you talked about the conflict between students who have a desire to serve, but also have the reality of dealing with massive student loans when they come out of college. So I'd like to pull the string on this a little bit, but I'd like to pull it with Mr. West. So, Mr. West, you've also talked quite a bit about the soul of IBM and your current employees and the service that they provide and how that's institutionalized. What I'd like to understand is, how does IBM value a prospective recruit's previous service? How do you view that? Is that something, are you looking for people? So, for example, graduates of the Do Good Institute, how do you view their service, and how does that affect the individuals that you're recruiting and who eventually become part of IBM?
Sure, no, it's a good question. I think that we look at it through a number of different lenses. So we have extensive relationships with universities around programs that focus on some sort of social impact, whether it's through, via service or volunteerism. But we have hundreds of partnerships throughout the world with universities, specifically around making that connection between becoming an IBMer and coming from a space that has an academic learning opportunity for service or for social impact broadly. We're very much aligned with skills. So a lot of what we're talking about right now is not about degrees; it's about skills. It's part of this new educational model that we are building through PTAC. We're going to have almost 200 PTAC schools by the end of this year. And we have over 600 corporate partners along with that, so they certainly recognize the need of looking for these skills. So, I think broadly we can say that, when we are looking for skills, it is experiential learning opportunities through service, through social impact, certainly have an impact on recruiting. And I'm a product of that. I don't come from the private sector. I've been at IBM for a year and a half, and I spent over 10 years in the public and nonprofit sectors, specifically around service and around international development. So, I can say from personal experience, making that connection, you're in the interview process and you're trying to sort of communicate how your experience directly translates to the kind of experience. But I think that you can make that connection. I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier in terms of making the connection of how service builds skills that directly translates into a variety of different employment opportunities. And if you can do that, you can really instill, I think, the want and the need to serve with young people today.
Thank you. Dr. Grimm, if I could follow up with you. I've heard some examples of high school age students who talk about service opportunities and service projects as a way of making their college application look better. So how do you encourage, or how would, being on the other side of that, how would you talk to young people of high school age that are thinking about serving and helping them to understand the value of service versus the opportunity to check a box on a college application to increase their likelihood of getting accepted?
All right, so it's a good question. And I probably would, a few years ago, have said, I was very concerned about the fact if students just started to get in service for one of the reasons was they thought it would help their college applications. But I actually said earlier, I think it's okay if self-interest is one of the reasons you start getting involved in service, if it's a high-quality experience and it leads you to want to keep doing service long after that, those experiences that may have been motivated for a variety of reasons. So what I think is really important is some things we talked about before, which is helping young people see how they can make an impact today. and not see service as just another check-the-box exercise. If it's a transformational experience for them, and they also can talk about the impact they're making, that's going to keep making them do service. That's going to be something that we're going to be more excited about at the college level, and I think that's going to be something we're more excited about when you get to a job, because from what I see, our students can talk about not just how they volunteered some hours, but what kind of difference they made in the lives of other individuals, and that's pretty compelling, I think, on an application or a job interview.
Thank you.
Mr. Kilgannon.
Thank you. Dr. Grimm, I'd like to continue with you, please. In your testimony, you made, in one of your recommendations, you said that we should consider making a home for the nonprofit sector in the federal government, and that no federal agency or department is presently equipped and designated to serve as the champion for nonprofit sector. I will confess that your level of optimism for federal government involvement is higher than mine. I think one of the strengths of the nonprofit sector is that it is decentralized and it allows creativity. What do you have in mind when you say there should be a federal agency or department overseeing the nonprofit sector?
I mean, well, I really appreciate that question, and I also appreciate your caution. And I made it as someone who had the privilege of getting to work in 2 different presidential administrations, and recognize that there are benefits and challenges to government involvement in things. The reason I first said is that nonprofits can be a great source of innovation. Also, every nonprofit has to function, has to engage multiple other volunteers and individuals. All boards of nonprofits are volunteers. The other thing I was trying to say in that point is we see the government supporting startup businesses. Right? We think it's really important for government at all levels to have more thriving businesses. We also need more thriving nonprofits. I've come around to believing we don't have enough nonprofits, and then often we don't have enough support to build the capacity for them to engage Americans in high quality service experiences and to help them scale up and make a bigger impact. And so that's why I was encouraging you to think about how could the federal government provide more support for an engine of innovation in our country, and also how young people, I think, will go between public service jobs in government and nonprofit. And so thinking about how you might be able to support young people in doing both nonprofit or government careers, I think actually could bring more young people into broader public service and even military service opportunities.
Okay, so let's look at the other side of the other end of that spectrum, and I'll direct the question to Mr. Chaboya and Ms. Walsh. You get federal government and then private philanthropy. Mr. Chaboya, much like Mr. Barney pointed out earlier, I was struck in your testimony of speaking about the joy and the passion of service. Similarly, philanthropy, many people who give cash gifts to enable this service experience that same joy and satisfaction. What should we as a commission be considering to facilitate private philanthropy to enable service?
Good question. I think to the degree that the federal government can continue to raise up the value of service as critical to developing a new generation of leaders in terms of sort of reknitting the social fabric in communities, of rebuilding the mediating institutions in our communities that hold our communities together, then I think it will help focus philanthropy on how to support service in maybe a more tangible and substantive way. That's an inadequate answer, but that's what I have at the moment.
I think tax incentive is always a good start. Back to AmeriCorps again, increasing the stipends, to stimulate those young people who have such debt to pay off. I was just at a meeting last week where, I was kind of surprised that innovation was down since the 70s across this country, and I'll piggyback on Dr. Grimm around funds being available for innovation are lacking. It used to be, and I thought, wow, when I was in college, was that true? And there were more startup grants potentially that didn't have strings tied to them, like go try this. Here's $5,000. Here's $10,000 to innovate. So I don't know if I don't know all of your comments and didn't read your testimony, but that may be an area, an opportunity for the federal government to stimulate that sector.
Well, I would just say that in the weeks ahead, as you think about this, if there are other ideas about how to stimulate private philanthropy, please make them available to us. Thank you.
Mr. Casey.
Thank you. I want to build off of what Tom just said in a little different way. You're all terrific and passionate advocates for service. And I think as our chairman opened, we're looking at everything from a universal obligation to just universal access, meaning the folks who want to serve now, especially the folks who want to do full-time service in the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, JVC, other programs, at least providing that opportunity. Because there are many more people signing up who want to serve than who can do the various programs. How would you make the case? I mean, and every year it's a fight for funding. Basically since AmeriCorps got started, even fighting for Peace Corps funding, which is a great program. One of our commissioners couldn't be here today, Mark Gearin, but he'd congratulate you, Jeff, because he ran the Peace Corps. How would you make the case to Congress, political leaders, mayors, governors, that there should be taxpayer dollars invested in this? And building off of Tom, in addition to incentives, how do we make the case to private philanthropy that out of all the choices, they should want to back these service programs? Because without that, we're all just dreaming of a better day.
So, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. You want to go ahead? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I think I drew the short straw. So I think it's a really good question because I got to work at the Corporation for National Community Service. So I enjoyed many exciting appropriations experiences. So one of the things I think we need to really move away from is saying that anyone think that service is just, it's a nice thing to do, all right? And so I mentioned that one of the ways that I think we can do that is one, a focus on innovation. Two, a focus on things that anybody in government would care about. So I talked about in some of my testimony, creation of new jobs, all right? Solving major problems that public leaders face. Leveraging a lot of impact for maybe a relatively small amount of funds in some ways. I talked about prize competitions where you actually might leverage a lot of great ideas and you're only awarding money to the groups who actually have shown some real promise, and you're boosting them and you're growing them that way. I think that kind of flipping how we maybe have talked about service and emphasizing some of those themes, that gets more people excited. I mean, we were fortunate to get some state investment in the Do Good effort, and I think it was because they thought about some of those kind of impacts, and they want to be known as a state that does innovation, that's driving economic development, that's creating, jobs. And so I think thinking about how we can talk about those can make it compelling.
The train came back. So I would go back to what said earlier about playing off self-interest, and I think that plays both at the political level and at the private philanthropy level. So at the public level, I think it's pointing back to those places in the community where volunteerism is making a huge impact, is having a clear return on investment, is engaging the community in different ways. I think on the private philanthropy side, again, it's preserving those tax credits that are available to private philanthropy, but also it's really on us to be able to tell the story effectively to potential donors. When I bring a former volunteer back in contact with volunteers that are currently in service, the connection and the energy that gets created there is incredible. And it refocuses them on what made an impact in their lives and their willingness to reinvest in that experience.
And I would go back to innovation, and I know Congress you know, everybody is a feel-good, and we all want to feel good, but at the bottom line, they want hard, cold numbers. How is this going to change what's happening in the United States? And I think the innovation and what's happening, what we all know is happening with automation that used to be like this, that is like this now. I can barely keep up. Everyone feels that. To tie that to the workforce with volunteer, I mean, I think we have to have people in communities really being lifelong learners. And how do you do that? You got to acquire new experiences. You got to get out there and try something different. And I think we're at actually might be a great space and time to really start to marry the two together as we all face the challenges of the workforce of tomorrow.
The only thing that I would add on that is just to underscore the point of demonstrating value and really investing in a strategic monitoring and evaluation process. You know, I won't touch the appropriations process with a 10-foot pole, but I know that, you know, a lot of times, you know, volunteer programs they're time intensive, but they're cost intensive. You have to support volunteers, housing, shelter, food. You know, these are core costs that can't go away. So a lot of times when you know, budgets are cut and there's not as many resources around, a lot of things like M&E are the first things to get cut. And it's counterintuitive to the longevity of the organization. And so, you know, without that real data and because technology has progressed as fast as it is and will continue to, it really needs to be incorporated into the strategic planning process and not something that's sort of done, you know, after the core stuff gets done. It needs to be moved into the core.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Skelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you all first for being here today. I realize that I am now the thing between you and lunch. And I'd also like to thank our intrepid staff for finding you all and bringing you here today. They've set themselves a high bar. No pressure. But I'd like to take us back to the title of this morning's panel, which is Inspiring Universal Service Across America, and put you on the spot with regard to the inspiration piece. We've been encouraged on our travels, especially when we speak to folks who are career-engaged, passionate folks with regard to service, and their admonition, both publicly and in private when they can corner us, is go big. This panel is a unique opportunity to make some statements to the American people and Congress, and they're encouraging us to not feel overly constrained and go big in pursuit of the goals that we've been asked to pursue. So I'd like to ask you each, if you were given the opportunity to commend to us one thing that you think could most affect or move the needle of inspiring people towards service in America, what would that be that we should consider doing? And don't be constrained. Like I said, don't touch the appropriations thing, too scary, agreed. But if you could offer some thoughts about why that big thing would be worth the reach. Ms. Walsh, if you don't mind.
The future of this country, and I know that is so broad, but it is true because local communities who, you know, I was in South Arkansas, the governor on Monday, and, you know, the jobs are displaced, things are, you know, not the brightest they've been. So how do local communities, still people don't want to move, mobility's down, how do local communities really look at their resources, strengths, and pull together to make their community exceptional at a time when, you know, things seem a bit unfunded? Picking one lever and doing it right, I think incorporating the workforce and the people, because everybody, you know, has a mortgage, everybody has to have food, you know, the common necessities of life around what is the change around volunteer engagement tied to these experiences to be lifelong learners and make their community a great place to raise their children and grandchildren, and at this time, great-grandchildren, because we have 4 generations alive.
Thanks. You know, I think that question around blurred lines, I think, is a pretty important, or maybe a you know, a more bold viewpoint to really sort of get out of the box of what volunteerism is and what it isn't. So I would encourage the commission to think, very widely about how we define service and about how other mechanisms or vehicles to making a social impact, via human beings can really comprise a variety of different methods and models. And so I would not be constrained with, really sort of the traditional thought of how we would really categorize that. And I think also I would just build on the fact that making closer ties of how volunteerism and how service connects with sort of the larger ecosystem of social good. So there are things that flexible grant dollars can do that others can't. There are things that people can do that dollars can't. There are things that whether it's some sort of business component, a subject matter expertise, product or service can do that money or a person can't. And that's all okay, and that they can all play in the same space. And I think if we can make more connections of how volunteerism and service can tie into that ecosystem, I think it continues to increase the business case. And then again, I think that we've all said, I think continuing to talk about the self-interest and what you get out of this, and really making the business case to the person, and what the investment of their time and their skills can do for them. So they're having an impact in whatever community they're working in, but also that they're going to get something out of that that's going to lead them to build on their professional journey as well.
So I'd encourage the commission to maybe flip your question and not see inspiration as your biggest challenge, but actually creating multiple high-quality opportunities for every American. I think Americans are hungry for these high-quality opportunities, and we're not providing enough of them today. And so how can we do that? And I think we've talked about a number of strategies here, but I think the big idea is if every American could have the opportunity to have multiple high-quality service opportunities early in life, our country will produce all kinds of additional impacts, innovations, and vitality that is even hard for us to imagine right now.
I would say that inspiration can be dissipated significantly by financial realities. And so I would encourage to look at a broadly accessible write-down of student debt and I'm thinking about young people who enter service, write off a portion of their student loan debt.
Thank you, Ms. Gelly. I want to thank you all. Look, due to the brevity but completeness of both the questions and answers, we have some additional time. So if I can, I'd like to impose upon your expertise. We'll go into a lightning round where I will offer each commissioner an opportunity to ask another question or follow-up. Please put 3 minutes on the clock for this round. I'll start by asking Ms. Walsh, you mentioned the Boys and Girls Club's web portal where somebody can put in the zip code and find service opportunities in their neighborhood. As we've traveled around the country, we've heard similarly other organizations that do likewise. Do you see a utility or feasibility of there being some central web portal where perhaps the Boys and Girls Club's data would feed into, somebody else's data could feed into, so when you put in a zip code, you get everybody's service opportunity, not just having to go to the Boys and Girls Club website?
Yes, and there are a few of those now. Not everyone is collectively on the same platform, but there are a few of those. And I actually had that as one of my answers, an application. When I say application, I mean a technology application where people could, I live here and what are the opportunities for me? Absolutely.
So there should be an app for that.
There should be an app for that you could swipe left or right, possibly.
Excellent. And then following up on Mr. Kilgannon's question about whether or not there should be a requirement, a federal requirement, right, for service opportunities. Of course, the way the federal government invokes federal requirements is by tying it to funds. So what would be your opinion of there being a federal requirement, let's say, tied to educational dollars, whether it be K-12 dollars or higher ed dollars, where you have to provide a service opportunity or jeopardize your funding?
We're all in.
All right.
Yeah. We do that anyway, so that's great.
So I think the key is how it's designed. So a requirement without proper funding to ensure high-quality experiences is actually going to perhaps turn off more people. So I think incentives probably are an exciting thing to try to do to try to build momentum, but also any requirement needs to also make sure that you're supporting and investing in high-quality experiences.
And I would just say that to be aware of the inherent danger of mandating and tying it to dollars may create experiences that in fact in the long term dissuade service. And so I think that's one of the tensions by requiring, is that everyone is doing it to check the box, not necessarily because of the experience they want to create.
Mr. West, anything?
I'll just only quickly add to what Ms. Walsh said around there's the app for that component. There is, and we do this as a company. We're launching a new online platform. It'll have internally facing and externally facing components to it, but internally it really is a one-stop shop for how can I become a P-TECH mentor, how can I volunteer in my community, what are my resources in terms of getting matching grant dollars for an organization that I work with, things like that. That really does match to your geography, to your issue areas, and to the resources that we provided as a company. And there's no reason that that can't exist broadly and publicly, and in fact it does. So I do think that probably in the next couple of years you're going to see that as a more mainstream method that's used.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Wada.
Great. Thank you very much. The question I had is first of all, how can we provide sort of that high quality, multiple experience for all Americans? Do you think that we have the capacity to do this in our country? And second, how can we get the nonprofits, the governments, the corporations to work toward this common goal? Because I think we need everyone involved and everyone in the game, right, have skin in this game. So how do we go about that? And so what should we be looking for to encourage that? And what should we be looking for that we don't do that discourage bringing together these sort of communities?
I'll kick us off then. So I would just maybe push back on the notion a little bit that you're leaving college, you have student loan debt, you want to commit to doing some sort of public service, and that you can't because that debt's you enter the workforce. I don't think that those are sort of mutually exclusive things. You are entering the workforce, and then a lot of companies do provide a wealth of service opportunities that are supported by that company. And so I would just maybe flip that a little bit in terms of thinking that because you have student loan debt or because you have family obligations to help support your family and things like that, that there are now no opportunities for service. There are, and a lot of companies do offer those. So I would mention that.
Well, I'll say, because this is the lightning round, I think my response is, given the kind of impacts that we're talking about here, how can we not figure out to invest and ensure that all Americans, especially young people, have those experiences and are set on that path? I've talked about some of the potential impacts that you could create. Do we not want a world and a country where our citizens are engaged, where they're developing innovations, where they're transforming the community for good? If you ask yourself those questions, I think you say to yourself, how can we not find the right investment to create a world where everyone's engaged in service?
So 2 things. I think the government using their role as a convener rather than as a regulator to bring together these organizations that are doing it to be able to learn from each other. And it's true that there are a lot of service opportunities as you move into job for service. There's also I would say that student loan debt is an obstacle. There are opportunities, but there are obstacles, and we see that all the time with our applicants.
And we, Boys and Girls Club of America, partner with a lot of corporations. We're blessed to be able to do that. They all have social impact departments, leaders, and at Boys and Girls Club, I know I'm not speaking for every nonprofit, but bringing and convening together the group, I think would be a great first start, because I think there are more similarities than dissimilarities. It's just, again, the connector.
Very much.
Mr. Barney.
Mr. Chairman, I love the lightning round. This is terrific. One of my experiences, personal experience I've had, whether it's working with like a nonprofit or in a faith-based organization, is that people will serve when they are asked to serve. So my question to each of you here in this lightning round is there any reason why our nation should not ask of each individual, not whether, but how they will serve? And how might that work? I'll start with you, Mr. Chaboya.
I think it's providing a wide array of opportunities that meet people where they are. So whether they're in high school or in college, whether they're entering the workforce or whether they're very senior in the workforce. So I think it's making sure that there's a variety of opportunities so people can do it within the context of their workplace. They can take a year off to do it. They can do it in different settings. So I think it's that kind of menu of opportunities that need to be out there.
And I don't think there's anything wrong at all with us asking everyone who lives in this country to do this. I think the key is that some generic ask may not be the one that gets people to do it. And so I think of diversity of options and where people are asked by other people at their school, in their community, to do these things is more likely to get them excited, engaged, and to do it.
I would say that creating opportunities and building awareness around those opportunities are probably what you need. I think that in the private sector, a number of different companies approach this differently. Some actually tie the performance to volunteer work that you do. Some have bonus incentives for it. So I think there are a range of ways to build in the expectation that this is going to be a part of what you do as an employee at this company. But I think that when we're talking about the prevalence of volunteerism or in service, I think a lot of this is really around awareness and making it easy. We used to joke at the Peace Corps all the time, and you really had to go through a marathon to actually be accepted into service, and you really had to sort of beat down the doors to continue to call. And when I was there, at least, we were really trying to get on par with the acceptance rate of graduate school because people were getting tired and going to graduate school because they couldn't. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do in making it easier and building awareness.
I think it does go back to awareness and building culture at a very young age. So I don't know if this is something that in 3 months, everybody in America is going to raise their hand for. But I do believe if we do start with, our future leaders of this country, which are the young people now, and put a plan in place on how we speak about it and how we speak about our country and your community, I think that would be a place to start.
Mr. Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was sitting here thinking, all of us have been to events like this. And we get in the car, we're driving home, we said, oh my gosh, I wish I would have said that. I'm going to use my lightning round to give you an opportunity to say, what is it that I wish I would have said before you get in the car?
So I'll start and just sort of play off the last question from Mr. Casey. So I would use what I've heard from Mr. West about what IBM is doing as a microcosm for what could happen in the country. So this was a leadership commitment from the top down to do this. That wasn't mandated, it was a choice. So rather than tying as a penalty for not doing service, what are the incentives you can add on top for education for corporations and others who do make that commitment?
Excellent, thank you.
And I'm going to build on this point because it seems like this lightning round's getting more difficult than the first two rounds from my perspective. I think the thing I would really say is that I really encourage the Commission to think about creating a diversity of service opportunities that Americans are just clamoring for. I mean, we talked a little bit about requiring it, but I think that you can flip it. I mean, and because there is an interest there, you can create opportunities that they're clamoring for. And I really encourage you to think about how to do that.
I would just build on the convener role that the federal government can play and really breaking down the silos that exist across sectors, even within the service space. I know that there's close partnerships with, CNCS and Peace Corps and other service organizations at that level. But there really should be, a convening platform where the private sector, the nonprofit sector, faith-based, and government can all come into a safe space and learn from each other and figure out ways that we can, really take our programs to scale by partnering and collaborating. I mean, it's no secret that it's hard to partner with the federal government. It is, and I can say that from personal experience. From being a public-private partnerships lead when I was at the Peace Corps, it's difficult. And so I think that if there's one thing that the federal government can do is really embrace that convener aspect and make it easy to bring people together, because that sector is really best positioned to do it.
And I would agree on the convener, and I've tried to slide some things I wanted to say in already. You've probably noticed that. But I believe there is a group missing at the table. I am fully aware that I am not 6 to 18, but I do represent them at this moment, and I'm happy to do that. But I think a consideration of bringing those seniors or those juniors who are doing incredible work in their community, who have taken on some kind of innovative volunteer project, and let's ask them.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Davidson.
So that's kind of a good segue to my question, which I think might take you out of your comfort zone a little bit. One of the other things we're not just looking at this array of blurring of the line types of service. We're also talking about civil service in the government at all levels, city, state. You pointed out, Mr. Chabala, about the difference between full-time service and part-time service. So that's full-time service, civil servants. I think it's no secret that over the past few decades, the idea of being a civil servant has kind of lost some of its reputation. I find that personally a little alarming and distressing. The negative and toxic narratives about bureaucrats being overpaid and underworked, and it's just not true. And so I kind of am going to pitch this question out to you, those of you especially who work with the young people today, and as you talk about the things that you're doing to inspire people to serve, is that considered one of the ways? Are we thinking about that? Are we encouraging people to, there's lots of different ways to serve, and one of those ways is in your government. What do you think?
Well, we absolutely do. I mean, the military is one of our largest partners. We have a program where there is a young person, I'll just give you this example, selected from every state in the United States, actually two, to represent their state and have a platform. And it usually is, as you can imagine in this day and time, geared around political, federal opportunities. So we definitely embrace that and talk to our young people all the time about, these are opportunities in the workforce where you can gain a skill that you would likewise have to pay for, if not specifically talking about the military right now. Civil service, yes.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think that I would view it any different from anything else that we've discussed this morning. It's part of, the larger sort of public service equation is government service full time. And so I think all of the same basic tenets apply in terms of awareness and opportunity and, depending on which way you want to look at it, really defining, how that plays a role from a personal standpoint in your career, but then how do we tie that to sort of the larger impact that's being made specifically in that issue area or in that community or that geography, and how do we make that connection to how nonprofits are building in that space, how are companies working in that space, how are faith-based working in that space, how is that part of the equation? I think it's sort of part and parcel to what we've been talking about this morning, broadly.
I really appreciate this question. One, as someone who got to work 8 years in the federal government, and I'll tell you, when I started, I told my wife, 1 year is all I'm going to do, and I loved it. And the way I think to maybe turn some of the challenges we have with civilian service is I suggested in my testimony to broaden how we define public service and to think about encouraging people to come into government service through programs that might have them have experiences with nonprofits and government, partly because government gets so much work done today in partnership with nonprofits, so I think it's really valuable to do that. Two, I think I'd encourage the commission to really emphasize the big impacts you can have by being a civilian servant. My time in government, it was certainly challenging, had a lot of responsibility, but it also, if you care about big ideas and trying to create big solutions, government is a place you have to be, and a partner to turn around a big issue.
So this may be an oxymoron, but JVC is agnostic about sort of where volunteers go after. And we see civil service or military service as a pathway. Our real interest is in helping the volunteer understand, unpack, and discern sort of where they go next based on what they've just experienced. And if it's in civil service, great. We have a senator who's a former Jesuit volunteer, a judge who's a former Jesuit volunteer. That's fantastic because they're bringing that experience to what they're doing.
Ms. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry,
I would just very, very quickly add, sorry to interrupt the flow here.
Everybody doesn't understand the word lightning. Go ahead, Mr. West.
Fair enough. I would just add that I think that the stereotypes that we're talking about for federal public service, I think that those exist. I think Ms. Walsh talked about it too in terms of the do-gooders and nonprofit, the stereotypes in the federal government that you addressed, Ms. Davidson. They also exist in the private sector. You're only in this for profit. And I think that just sort of underscores the need for this convening where there is a safe space where you can break down those stereotypes because they're still very prevalent.
Great, thank you. Good point. Yeah. Well worth the extra 30 seconds. Ms. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about the 6-year-old. You talked about the 6-year-old. Mr. Chaboya, when you were asked why you serve, you talked about your parents, and you talked about your parents as a role model for your service. So my question is, how do we encourage parents and influencers of our youngest people? Because we have heard, as we've had these discussions, that service should start as young as possible, starts with things that happen in the home, more local, starts with parents who are role models. So I have a kind of a two-part question. How do we encourage parents and influencers to be those role models for service? And how young should we expect our youngest Americans to start serving?
So this has been said already, but it really is about creating a culture of service in the country. And it can't be regulated, it can't be legislated. But by encouraging every organization, whether it's corporate, whether it's educational, of engaging people, again, where they are, so that parents are doing service with their children, that children are encouraged to do service at the earliest age possible. It's about building that culture. And that takes a united effort between government, between the corporate sector, and between the nonprofit sector working together.
Yeah, and because it's lightning round, I will emphasize something that you're saying, but it is obvious. If parents in the home are volunteering and engaging in service, children are much more likely to also engage. And so I think one of the things is figuring out opportunities where parents and children can serve together and encouraging even more organizations to be open to it. I think sometimes it's hard for some some organizations are reluctant to take really young volunteers. So I would encouraging organizations to be more open to parent-child service opportunities.
Yeah, I would just take a step back for a second also and just say that, going on an international volunteer service assignment, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, you tell people what you were doing, and they'd say, well, why? And you say, this is part of the Peace Corps mission, and we have these 3 goals, and they're like, but you don't get paid. No, we don't get paid. This is part of our, our mission and our goals, and you go on, and it really just sort of opened, I think, my eyes to the fact that this isn't part of this culture, and it's something that's unique, I think, about America in general. So I do think that this country does have this sort of approach and volunteerism and service in our DNA. I do think it needs to be probably updated and promoted to provide more opportunities.
And of course, family engagement is part of the holistic program of Boys and Girls Club. So, but when we do find, parents who, quite frankly, if we looked at social media right now, that take the time to put their phone down and the kids put their phone down and do something collectively together at Boys and Girls Club, what we're finding is parents are like, that was so great, that was so fun. Like that was a novel idea or something, So I think some of it is really disconnecting and getting the parents and kids engaged as early as possible in connecting in their community and doing something good together. And that sounds so not okay to say, but in our society today, it is extremely important.
Mr. Kilgannon.
Thank you. And following what Mr. Allard said earlier, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that through my experience and through what I've heard here today in your testimonies, it is clear that there are many, many thousands of people who have been positively impacted by what you and your organizations do. And so thank you for that. And as you change those lives, you all have at your disposal limited resources. How do you think about, what considerations do you give to spending those human resources, financial resources, domestically versus overseas? Because I think, possibly with the exception of Mr. Grimm, you've each talked about doing work overseas. And I ask that because if we were to consider a recommendation that involved a large amount of public resources, how should we consider using that domestically versus internationally?
So I'll start. IBM's a company of almost 400,000 people, and we work in, I think, literally every country that the State Department allows us to work in. And so, this is obviously a global effort. I do think that, as you're looking at providing service opportunities, a lot of these are Americans who are going abroad to serve. And so that's not necessarily, two competing interests. And there's all kinds of, benefits that are associated with that. I think in terms of the way that we look at it, we try to marry what we do best as a business with our service opportunities because we want to make an impact. We've, over the years, engaged in a number of different sectors and issue areas, and we've found that we've done a lot of good, but we have been sort of surface level. So the phase that we're in now is really sort of narrowing down our focus, and that can be for geographies or by issue area, so we can have a deeper impact, and we have a larger opportunity to scale. And a lot of that is looking inward in the United States. But I think that we are somewhat uniquely positioned in the sense that we have to be supporting the business, and that's both in the U.S. and all around the world.
And for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, we are partnered with the military overseas. So those are our affiliate organizations. So that may be a little bit different than, say, if we had Boys and Girls Clubs of Germany. So it's a little different funding structure.
And while I don't have a percentage recommendation, I would say to keep both options wide open, because I think one of the benefits of service is it helps people engage with communities or people that they may not otherwise engage with. So that's critically important on a domestic level. It's even, I don't want to say more, but increasingly important at an international level, that those types of relationships, partnerships, and understandings happen between people in the U.S. and in other countries. We're in 5 countries right now, and we'd like to expand beyond that.
And I'll be brief because I know the time is up and I don't want to be called out. But I will mention that with our Do Good effort, we do support students engaging in hands-on projects abroad. We just had a group of students who came back from working on hands-on projects in India, where they're making an impact there and they're really developing skills. And I'll tell you, those experiences are also going to help them get really good jobs when they graduate from the university. So I think it is important to offer, domestic and international, given the world we live in and the importance of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Casey.
We're the Commission on Military, National, and Public Service, and this has been a great conversation, mostly about public and civilian national service, and I appreciate what you said, Ms. Walsh, about your partnership with the military. Do any of you have any other suggestions on how we can better link civilian service and military service? General Stanley McChrystal, who chairs the Service Year Alliance, has really been pushing an effort to look at that as two sides of the same coin. Any thoughts on that?
I guess I'll go first. What I would encourage is that I said in my testimony, making people aware of the kind of ladders of a variety of careers they could have. I actually think that one of the challenges in working with a lot of young people is they're not aware of the diversity of civilian, military, public service, national service, other kind of experiences. They may have a great passion for something, but they aren't aware that they could actually do that for a paid job. And so I think we need to really break through on those kind of awareness issues and also illustrate to them the kind of career ladders there might be in military, public, national, and other kinds of service.
I mean, I would agree. I think it's education because I was literally with 500 teenagers. They started talking about like the Army Corps of Engineers. They didn't even understand that those were jobs, that what they did. They thought they were all engineers, making buildings in New York. And I'm like, wow, okay, we have some room to educate some young people on this. So from a young person's perspective, I think it is actually that.
And just sort of building on the education, one of the things I was going to say earlier is one of the things that could come out of a partnership is a sort of a broad educational effort between the corporate world, nonprofit world, and the government, talking about the different ways that people can serve. What IBM is doing. One of our board members is a partner at Goldman Sachs. They have thousands of people doing service. You have people doing service full-time because they work in the nonprofit world. You have people doing service in the military. And so to be able to paint a picture of what that service looks like and the different varieties in which that can be lived out, I think would be critically important.
Ms. Skelly.
I'll yield, Mr. Chairman.
There being no further questions, Mr. Chaboya, Dr. Grimm, Mr. West, Ms. Walsh, we thank you very much and greatly appreciate your time today for providing valuable information to the Commission. So we'll now dismiss the panelists. If you'd like to take the reserved seats in the front rows there, please, you're welcome to stay. And we'll invite the public to provide comments. The Commission is committed to transparency and openness with the public. In keeping with these principles, the Commission intends to provide the public with an opportunity to deliver public comments during our hearings. As a reminder, in order to provide the greatest opportunity for as many participants to offer a comment as would like, public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person. As is noted on our website, sign-up for public comment took place between the opening of registration and the start of this hearing. However, we had nobody sign up for public comment during the registration process. Therefore, I would like to invite any member of the public who's in attendance who has been inspired to share a comment during the hearing to please come up to the mic. And we will ask you to please identify yourself and any affiliation you may have, and we will take comments on a first-come, first-served basis for the remainder of our time.
Thank you for this group. My name is Li Yang. I hope I can have the same amount of time as other panelists because I do have a lot of things to say. So since you are limited to 2 minutes, I'll just briefly, of course, very briefly. First, I want to say they are always considered to get money from the government. But I think the government and the purpose is really to provide the basic important tasks that they need, like education, improve the quality of the students and the teachers. But I think what they point out is a public-private partnership. I think this is very misleading. This basically reflects extreme fraudulent and criminal network operation. That means 3 branches, and including here domestic to overseas global. And that means including abuse, official misconduct, government gain, and then you have public and private, and of course, including murder. So I just hope you can really seriously think that volunteerism is everybody can do it. The best is to do your job in your position. And the best, the government should recruit the best sincere integrity person to do the job. Currently, they don't talk about data. The data now is very fraudulent and very phony, and so the same as persons. So I just hope you can devote your time to have a better system, to have provide a public comment, and to put the comment in the website so everybody can reflect on it, everybody can target on those problems to solve the problem. Currently, we just don't have the system. Actually, that's delete, conceal, suppress everywhere. On the other hand, the way they do it is really, as I say, fraud, crime network operation. They really provide more problem for our social system and for the government or private sector. So you got to really target the problem rather than being misled by those what you call expert testimony.
Thank you very much for your comment.
And I hope you can have a website so people can provide comments.
We do, and
Thank
I will
you.
announce that shortly.
Thank you.
Likewise, if you have additional comments that you'd like to provide in written format, you can provide them to the staff out at the registration desk. Is there anyone else who would like to provide a public comment? So for those that are following us either on our live stream or will be watching this later on C-SPAN, if you would like to provide comment, please do so through our website, which is www.inspire2serve.gov. That's inspire2serve.gov. Over the course of the last year, we have heard from thousands of Americans on this topic. We want to hear from thousands more. It's truly important for us to have this input so that any recommendations we may put forward will be reflective of the diversity of the demographics of this great country. There being no further business before this committee, the hearing is adjourned.